Hello and welcome to our blended podcast with Hunt, Hike, Harvest Outdoors and Fast Performance. This is our adventure series, and we are now on to episode number 2 with our guest Alex Harz. In this episode, we dive deep into all of the preparation that Alex did in terms of physical training to prepare for climbing Mount Everest. If you missed episode 1, make sure to go back and check out that episode, as that takes a very close look at all of the actual trials, tribulations, and dangers that Alex faced on the mountain and how he climbed the world's tallest peak. We appreciate you tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe to our page, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Welcome back to the Fast Performance / H3O podcast. This is our second episode of our blended podcast with world famous mountaineer Alex Harz, who scaled Everest. And in our first episode, we talked a lot about the events that happened on the mountain, his journey from base camp all the way to the summit and back, and some of his trip down to Nepal and seeing the culture down there. And in this episode, we brought along our scholarly trainer, John Cole, who is going to partner up with Joel. And they're going to talk to Alex about his physical and mental preparation, as well as some of his mountaineering skills to prepare for this treacherous hike. So with that, I'll let you guys take off. All right.
I'm sure you probably have like do you have a whole Rolodex of things that
I noticed you brought it. I saw you brought it.
First of all, Alex, thanks for coming back. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Like I told Jason last time, it's a pleasure just to hang out with you guys. So anytime we can do that, I'll try to make it happen.
That's awesome. I've been editing the first one and getting that prepped, and it's just been like fun to kind of even listen to it again and relive some of the things. And I've told a ton of people about it already, so it's like the anticipation of getting now into some of this stuff is going to be pretty fun too, I think. So
cool.
Yeah. And I think I listened to the first one and I'm like, oh, I should have asked him this. Oh, I wanted to ask him that.
That's why you brought your notepad.
Hence why you're sitting here.
He's the only one that has a notepad.
Right.
So, yeah. All right. Well, what do you got? Fire away.
Well, I know that Alex and I
where do you want to start on this?
Alex and I had
At the beginning.
Pretty lengthy conversation in the office before we even got started with your webcast last time. Just talking about, let's start from the beginning. If somebody experience and has that dream of climbing Everest, how far out are you, not just physically preparing, and we do want the answer to that, but actually starting to wrap your head around the logistics of what it takes to do that?
Well, my first response would be, what kind of experience do they have in mountaineering? Right. If you're already in mountaineering, then it's a different play versus if this is something I just want to start doing because, like me, I saw something on TV and a dream began, right?
Yeah.
The second thing is, actually, it's a logistical thing with regards to family. Right. If you have any children under the age of 18 that are, responsible or dependent on your livelihood, I don't know if I'd recommend it because of the high risk of it, right?
Sure.
But if you have mountaineering experience, then your training process, you could probably get into it if you've done Denali, done some high peaks, Aconcagua, so on, not just your first big peak because you don't want to just go straight to Everest.
Sure.
Then you can probably get to the training and the planning of it within a year and a half, 2 years, kind of a thing.
Okay.
If you have zero experience, it's a lengthy process.
Yeah.
Because you should get versed in the skills of mountaineering first and foremost. B, then you should do like the 14 years if you're in Colorado or states that have some higher peaks, Seattle, Washington and so on. Then you want to start climbing those localized peaks to get some idea of elevation, because the one thing that you don't know is how your body is going to respond to altitude.
Right.
Again, it doesn't matter how great of an athlete you are. At the end of the day, the genetics will come into play, and it's a huge portion of the success on Everest. So you need to know, well, can I even go that high?
Right.
And that's where you start building up, 14,000 feet, 17,000 feet, go down to South America, go to Mexico and climb, some of the mountains down there or in South America and try to get up 19,000, 20,000 feet and so on and see how you respond. And in my process of doing that, I came across guys that were ultramarathon runners that run the Death Valley 100, guys that are world-class triathletes, and they couldn't get above 17,000 feet.
What is and not to derail you here, but like, just for our listeners so they understand, when you say they can't get above 17,000 feet, what does that mean? Do they just bonk? Did they just hit the wall? They just literally get altitude sickness? What's the marker that indicates to them, oh, I'm this world-class athlete, but I can't go any higher
This
than
one's not in my
this
in my
number.
repertoire.
This isn't in my.
Yeah.
This isn't in my.
Yeah, there's a couple factors.
World.
You know, you have the hypoxic ventilator response, right? Which is your body's ability to adjust, you know, to the barometric pressure and the lack of oxygen in the air, or the density of oxygen in the air. So how does your body adjust to that? How does it take it in and be able to process more of this oxygen at higher altitudes? That's the first thing. The second thing is you have like the basal vein in your brain. That's another thing that dictates, okay, how's your body reacting to the immediate pressure outside and the amount of oxygen or lack thereof in the air, right? And so these are the chemical markers in your body that start to take place that you don't know and will slowly, insidiously show their effects if you don't acclimatize it properly, or your body doesn't allow it. Then the signs that will show up initially will be headaches. You won't be able to sleep well. You might get dizzy. You might start vomiting. And these are the kind of the initial responses that are saying, okay, we got to watch out for this. We got to slow down the acclimatization process for
The
this.
body will let you know.
Exactly. The body will let you know.
Yeah.
And then the farther you push it, the more extreme those responses become. You know, and for example, one guy when I was climbing Aconcagua, again, world-class athlete, you know, he suffered from chain Stokes breathing, which is basically your body stops breathing in the middle of the night while you're sleeping. It just stops breathing. That subconscious, breathing response just stops, shuts down. And after 30 seconds to a minute of not taking a breath, you just wake up in a panic, gasping for air.
Yeah, it's funny because you said that in the original episode, and it never dawned on me until like you have this almost, to me it was this Hollywood connection where you've seen them show that in a movie where you see someone like all of a sudden jump to, but they've never explained exactly what that is. And so when you said that in the first episode, I'm like, aha, I never heard that until you mentioned it. And literally, some of those movies that depict mountaineering and climbing Everest in these, adventure-based movies, they've shown those things before. And I was like, oh, now I know what that means.
Yeah, you can even just visualize it like a Friday the 13th kind of deal, right? Where somebody's having a bad dream, and they come to, and the camera's like right in front of their face, like, oh, so that's how I visualize that happening, but
and
just
that's
in real life, right? Instead of a script.
Well, and the thing is that if you don't know about this, you're not aware of it, you've never experienced it, it
plan
freaks you
for it.
out big time.
Oh, I bet it does.
Yeah, and
you just got to feel like you're drowning.
Not only that, you will refuse to go back to sleep the rest of the night.
Yeah,
so
you're
you're leaning
scared.
up against your tent, you're thinking about, if I go back to sleep, I'll never wake back up.
Right.
And if you don't know how to react to it, or to take, proactive measures to try to address it for the next time you go to sleep, that's it. And so, and in that situation in Argentina, when I was down there, when that arose to one of my teammates, I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you some ginkgo, we'll give you some Diamox, and try to get you acclimatized. So then hopefully the next night it doesn't happen. And surely those measures helped him. But he then got to a ceiling point again about 19.5. Where all of a sudden he just couldn't move any further. And that also then ties in with, the anaerobic threshold and these kind of factors where all of a sudden you just can't go any further because your body is not allowing, your Vo2 Max is not allowing you to generate or process more oxygen under exercise, under stress, under load. And but these are things that you don't know till you go. And there's been some technologies now that allows you to try to figure it out up to 21,000 feet.
Right.
You can do altitude training, with masks that restrict the amount of oxygen flow or percentage of oxygen flow to you, or sleep in tents, or canopies that then, have that oxygen density sucked out of it. But that only gets you to a certain point of saying, okay, well, I don't get headaches, I might not be nauseated, I might not puke, and so on, at 21,000 feet or 19,000 feet in a tent environment. That tells you a little bit. But again, once you're working hard and burning 10,000 to 20,000 calories a day, it's a different story.
Right? Yeah, it's kind of like a lot of things when we talk about training, where it's like we always try and find ways and methods to create things. But even in, like you said, get into a tented or an acclimatized, you see all these chambers and things like that get made, which are again unbelievably expensive, right? But it's never going to be the exact same, right? You're not taking into account of cold and the amount of effort that you put in at that point to get to there, and the fatigue state that you might be in, and all these other things.
Everything
but yeah,
else.
it may give you a window of kind of, experience, but it's not going to replicate for sure.
100%. It can tell you that you're not even have a chance of doing it, but that's it. So it can eliminate the option, say the people that get sick at 17,000, 19,000, 21,000 feet. It can tell you, all right, don't even try it. You're wasting your time.
Yeah.
But it'll only give you a false sense of, possibility that you might be able to do it.
Right.
So it can also be a dangerous thing because people say, well, yeah, I sleep in my bed at 21,000 feet and I'm fine. So therefore they think they can just go and, skip, the whole process of working your way up in altitude on mountains and just go straight to 20,000 or 22,000 foot mountain.
So I had a question about that when it comes to that, because I know you and I had discussed it, and kind of goes back to, if you read Krakauer's book Into Thin Air and then saw the movie adaptation and everything that's associated with it, it was sort of going back to the glamorization or the tourist factor, the marketing of climbing Everest, and how many people that were without a doubt out of their league, paying an awful lot of money to say that they summited Everest. So do people still okay, if I've got my, $50,000 or $100,000 or whatever it is to climb Everest, are they going through that process of they can even handle that altitude, or are they just plugging into supplemental oxygen from base camp and going all the way up?
More that people are becoming, well, it's a combination of two things. The low-cost operators, right? The localized Nepali operators, for example, that offer low-budget trips, they're less likely to fall into looking at the qualifications of the climber.
Okay.
What's their experience? What have they done?
Right.
Are they able to even attempt this feat?
Yeah.
They're more likely to say, okay, well, we'll take them.
Yeah.
And we know they're not going to probably get past the ice fall.
Right.
Or Camp 2 or Camp, 3 at best.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter because they already paid us.
Right.
So there are some of those operators are out there.
Right.
But the more responsible operators and the clients that seek those operators, they're more trained and more prepared because they won't even be allowed on the expedition to get the permit. So.
Hey guys, we hope you're enjoying today's episode. We want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors, Pnuma Outdoors, Mio-labs, and Thor Nutrition. Be sure to check out our show notes and take full advantage of exclusive discounts offered to our listeners just for tuning in. Now, back to our show.
So yeah, we're talking about the commercialization of Everest, and obviously a lot of people have seen the movies and read Into Thin Air and stuff like that, and you're talking about the level of preparation that you had to go through. How applicable is that to let's say somebody who just has a lot of money and wants to go to a fancy cocktail party and tell everybody that they summited Everest?
Well, again, I think it goes in cycles. First and foremost, you can't pay somebody to take you up Everest. You can pay for additional amenities, more oxygen bottles, better base camp tents, better food, this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you still got to put one foot after another.
Yeah.
You can get short roped, and I've seen that where you have a guy on the front of you. Continue taking some load, but at the end of the day, you still got to be able to go to that altitude, and you still got to put one foot in front of the other.
Right.
So what the money can do, like you said, the cocktail party scenario, it can give you maybe a 10, 15%, maybe 20% advantage. But at the end of the day, you still got to be able to climb the mountain. And so the ones that typically go under that kind of premise, which is not many these days, versus, like you said, during the thin air times, when commercialization of Everest really began. So everyone was trying to go to Everest because this was their chance.
Yeah.
It's become a lot less. Now, there is also a little bit of a balance between the operators. The more traditional operators that have been going in year out, the ones that are a little bit more expensive, the Western-style operators, they have some requirements that you have to meet. You have to have climbed Denali, you have to have climbed some high peaks, you have to show some aptitude to high-altitude mountaineering, otherwise they're not even going to put you on the permit. They're not even going to give you a chance to go.
Okay.
Where some of the new low-cost operators that just want to get into the market, they might overlook some of that and let it slide, and then deal with it once you get to the mountain.
Okay.
Because they will make the final call anyway.
Right.
So let's say if you can't get above the Khumbu ice fall at 19,700 feet, and that's the end of your expedition, doesn't matter, you already paid up front.
Right.
It's the end of your expedition.
Yeah.
Where,
you don't pay a percentage of how far you make it.
Yeah, it's not based on a percentage.
Can I get a refund for that?
And so they, some of those operators will just say, okay, that's attrition.
Yeah.
We get our profit the same out of a guy that's there for 3 weeks versus a guy there that's for 2 months.
Yeah.
So, it really depends. But I think, the Chinese have put quite a bit of more restrictions on the north side of Everest. So now they're starting to force the fact that you have to have an 8,000 meter peak under your belt or a 26,000 foot peak under your belt before you can apply. The Nepalese government talks about that. Whether or not they'll make that a hard implementation, don't know yet. And that will vary on who's running, the operation down to Kathmandu, and that changes yearly. And it'll also change on, the economics of the mountain itself.
Right, right.
So getting into, you specifically, right? We talked about Aconcagua, we talked about Denali, those were, I'm assuming, and you can correct me, that those were part of your progression. We talked in episode 1 about I told myself I was going to do this. I got up next day, post-hold a 14er, right, with bad gear and probably terrible intentions. And then, I'm assuming that those were part of your progression, right? From that day, and the realization you said after, I think, the second 14er that you did, you went, I probably better figure some stuff out here, right?
100%.
Talk about, number one, I've seen some of these things, and I know some people that have done Boulder Mountaineering Company, out of Utah and some stuff like that, where you begin the processes of understanding some survival skills. You understand how to, navigate better. You learn how to read some things, and talk about the variables that you started to put in place. And, how did you then start prioritizing them? Because concurrently, obviously, you had to start training, which we're going to get to. But, talk about some of the most necessity-based things that process began, where you went, oh, crap, I'm going to have to do a lot more than just work hard at this, because that's a lot of people can work hard.
Yeah, after the second 14er, we were kind of pushed into the idea, okay, where can we get some formalized training? Where can we learn about mountaineering versus just showing up in snowboarding gear and post-holing and hopefully make it to the summit, and not know anything about avalanches and, snowfall and all that kind of stuff. So we ended up actually, my mountaineering partner at the time and my mountaineering partner that's done every mountain with me but Everest, we signed up for the Colorado Mountain Club, the CMC.
Okay.
And that's a great resource. So they have chapters in Boulder. They have one in the Denver chapters in Golden. There's, down south in Springs and so on. So that's a really good resource. And there you start to learn about winter camping, for example, wilderness survival, glacier travel. I went into rock climbing, rock leading, and this kind of stuff as well, because a lot of the knot systems and a lot of, the safety systems are the same, in mountaineering as it is in rock climbing. Now, the techniques may be different, and of course, the style of climbing is completely different oftentimes, but a lot of the, the essential training that you need to know and the techniques you need to know are very similar. So we started going into that in depthly, and through that, you then meet, guys that also want to do this and women that want to do this as well. They have the same mutual interest. I want to go do 14ers on the weekend, or I want to go do Mount Rainier, or I want to try Denali one day. And then you start to form a group of people that you go do some of these things with. And that is nice.
It's a small fraternity.
Exactly. It becomes a small fraternity. Quick. Yeah, and then it also becomes a situation where you can figure out who you can trust your life with. Like this, you just can't say, oh, well, I'm done. Let me just go back to the car and drive away. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You might be days out. You might be weeks out. You might be, X amount of hours out from getting to a safe place. And for that reason, you need to be around people that you can trust your life in, and vice versa.
Well, and they have to have this very similar background. You can't have one of you know how to do things.
Exactly.
Or how to get yourself out of a bind or a hairy situation. Like, if everyone isn't as versed, you're in trouble.
And that's where, for example, in the thin air story became a big issue. Of course, there's a lot of factors that came into play for that fateful day, which today is now the 4th deadliest day on Everest. But at the end of the day, you had too much reliance on, for example, 2 team leaders, right? Scott Fisher, Rob Hall in that case, versus say, no, if things go bad, I still know how to manage the situation. Even if I've never been up this mountain, I can still fall back on my techniques and training and so on, to try to safely get myself back down to Camp 4 or back down the mountain. So, these kind of factors are very important.
Let's dive into my favorite subject. Which is the science behind training for this. And I know you and I discussed offline a little bit, about oxygen deprivation and, how you train the body for that type of thing. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking is it right to train high, sleep low, vice versa, so on and so forth, and sort of the issues that I ran into in the past with training endurance athletes that trained, slept, eat, and do everything else at 7,800 feet. And there's a lot of talk in the scientific community right now about where does chronic muscle wasting begin? What is that exact altitude that you want to train for? And it seems like even though we keep going to these USOC altitude summits, every 3 to 4 years, new information is coming out every day on what they think is the right thing to do as far as enhancing your training to be able to, and let's just say from an H3O standpoint, I'm going on a hunt, and I know that hunt is going to be somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 feet, right? How do I prepare myself to just spend time in that area? What is the best way for me to get ready for that?
Yeah, and there's a couple schools of thought there. Some say, climb high, sleep high. Some say climb high, sleep low, because the amount of time it takes to acclimatize. Right. And on Everest, you tag and come back down.
Yeah.
Right. On Denali, we just kept going up. We never went back down.
Yeah.
And that's two different philosophies.
Right.
I went and watched all that, by the way. So that I got a better idea of like that whole, because he kept talking about it, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go check that out. Yeah, because I was interested in that too, because as you mentioned in the trek, right, like you, based on that altitude and whatever else, you were able to just continue ascending.
And we weren't planning that way. We were planning on doing it more of the
Similar.
climb high, sleep low philosophy, but we just kept going up and said, you know what, we feel pretty good. Let's just keep going.
Yeah.
Because the one thing that is demoralizing is losing altitude when you've worked so hard to gain it. And then when you're lugging a lot of weight like a Denali, it's like, I got to cash this, come back down, grab the other half. And, and it's one of those things that, people that like the alpine style, that like to go light and just keep going up, and others that do expedition style that say, no, we're going to shuttle our way almost like a siege of this mountain up this mountain. And so from a hunting perspective, or people that want to train, for example, like for the Leadville race or something like that, I think at the end of the day, because the amount of time you're going to spend up there, I think the best way to do it is spend that time up there. Because you're not going to spend 52 days up there.
Sure.
And you're not going to get to 17,000 feet, which is a point where you start having the full degradation of your body. Civilizations can't live above 17,000 feet indefinitely. Your immune system shuts down, your digestive system shuts down, your thirst receptors go away, they get suppressed, your hunger receptors get suppressed, and so on, all this stuff that starts to happen inside you. If you're going to that situation, you can't really train for it, so you just got to go do it. But if you're talking about hunting at, let's say, 12,000 feet or lower, or, doing races, cycling races or road races, I would say spend time up at that altitude.
Including sleeping at that.
Exactly. And what you can do is first go up, have a lunch.
Right.
So let's say ride your bike up to Leadville, have a lunch up there, take a water break, and then go all the way back down to Copper Mountain for your first trip. Then maybe the next time, okay, let's go spend half a day up there.
Right.
See how I reacted the first time, base the second time off of that. And then the third time, I'm going to go and actually spend the night up there in Leadville. Because I know that the race crest on my bike race or whatever is going to be at that altitude.
Sure.
And then okay, at a full day, because above 6 hours is really, it starts to show itself. That after a full day, it's like, okay, I felt okay at 12,000 feet. Now I want to train here, stay here consistently. Same thing goes with the hunting guys that are lugging a lot of weight, so.
Does in your experience, you talked about, 17,000 feet being sort of the magic number on when the body starts to shut down. There's a lot of information and misinformation, quite frankly, out there about how high is too high for the body to gain muscle mass, i.e., like, if I'm working out at this altitude, I'm wasting my time. Like, I'm not going to gain any muscle mass above this number, which is obviously a lot lower than 17,000 feet. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's absolutely right, because above 17,000 feet, you're never going to gain muscle mass.
Of course.
You're only going to lose it, and it just depends at what rate and depending on how much higher you go.
So there's some arguments or some, numbers out there that are getting thrown around that say you can't gain muscle mass above 8,000 to 10,000 feet. And based on oxygen debt, your ability to recover, so on and so forth. I kind of called BS on that because we were training our athletes at 7,800 feet and we never had a problem with that. But the school of thought saying that the actual number is a lot lower than 17,000. 17,000 is when stuff starts to go bad, in the body, not just your level of human performance. So I guess my question is, are you able to gain ground on human performance up to that level, or is there a level lower when things are starting to slip and maybe you're not gaining the same level that you were before?
Yeah, I would. In my experience, I would say it's somewhere between 10 and 14.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I think if you're training above 14,000 to try to get muscle mass or additional endurance, I don't think you're going to get much of a benefit out of that.
Right.
That's just my personal thought. There's no scientific backing to that, but just my experience and the people that I know that do the same thing that I do. I think in that range, you can get a lot of benefit, for sure.
With that train of thought, and again, this is kind of outside my wheelhouse, would you just say that you're never really fully prepared for that climb, since you can only train to a certain level, that there's going to be that magic unknown?
Yes.
Right? Where, you might be the best athlete at 14,000 feet, but the minute you step on that mountain, you might be one of the worst athletes on the mountain.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. It couldn't be more true, because there's scenarios where I've seen it both ways, where the guy, for example, that might be the fifth best person in shape on the team at sea level or at 5280 here, is the guy who does the best at 21,000 feet. Where the guy that was an absolute super stud at this altitude, or even up to, let's say, Vail's altitude, it absolutely could not get above 19,000 feet, like what happened in Argentina,
right,
or what's happened on Everest that I've seen too.
Right.
World famous athletes that literally could not go above 21,000 feet.
Yeah.
They had a 28% oxygen saturation level. They almost fell into a coma, and it had nothing to do with their performance ability.
Right.
It had to do with physiology.
Right.
So there's that giant question mark in your training. It's like, I've gotten to 75% of my goal, but that last 25% is a total coin flip.
What you're doing is you're basically buying variables against the house.
Right.
You're saying, all right, I'm increasing my odds, like playing craps. You're buying numbers against the house, right? That's all I'm doing. By training and getting, becoming a better athlete and increasing my Vo2 Max and all this kind of stuff, I'm just buying odds that this variable will be less likely the factor why I will not succeed. Right? But then you have those variables you can't control, i.e. the altitude, avalanches, weather, sickness, dietary responses, these kind of things that you can't predict, right? And those are all variables that all culminate into the big picture of whether or not you're going to make it to the top or not.
Right. So speaking of that, talking about, Vo2 Max, you talked about saturation and some of those things within your training and your preparation. How, what resources, you talked about the CMC piece, which is, starting to understand the mountaineering pieces and all the ins and outs of what are going to be essential from a skill perspective, right? Like skills that you need to have. From a training perspective, how dialed in, or from a, the same kind of token as far as research goes, what were the things that you did? Like, how precise were you, or, what are the things that you sought out in order to kind of like figure out, like, this is where I am right now. Are there comparables that I need to get to, like with Vo2 Max or whatever? And as you said, sure, there's factors that are uncontrollable, but did you identify any of those things as you trained to kind of figure out, like, here's where I'm at, and these are, just kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I use most of my training factors and my decisions on how I would progress based on my previous performances on other mountains. So in Aconcagua, Denali, Rainier, and so on. And I said, okay, if I can increase my overall aerobic ability, and maintain that anaerobic bursting ability, because the athletes that typically do the best at extreme altitude are your hockey players and soccer players, not necessarily your distance runners or your Tour de France guys. And that's because of the way they train, the way they're wired, right? That ability to be able to anaerobically burst when you've hit that wall, to get over this feature, or to make it to the top of the Lhotse phase, or whatever the case may be, depending on the mountain, is huge.
That's interesting.
Because you can hit that wall.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, it's like a 4-cylinder, twin turbocharged Japanese Fast and Furious car. You can't get one more RPM out of that car.
Right.
Right. And so that's where that ability to be able to have that reserve to burst anaerobically is very crucial at high altitude.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, traditionally, soccer players, hockey, players, those kind of athletes typically are stronger at altitude than your distance runners, for example.
Yeah.
So you're saying baseball players are not in that group?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's what he's saying. Jason.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I mean,
but-
we do like the short burst stuff.
You-
I guess it's the
3
longevity
seconds.
that
I don't
you're
think
looking
3
for.
seconds
Hey,
is.
hey. We're still athletes.
It's the 15 miles of running.
It's,
that you want to see.
yeah,
that's
we're not
what it
track athletes. We're just athletes.
But it's interesting that you say that. So, from the things that you did, let's say off the mountain, that's kind of what, I want to get to. What are things you did off the mountain in terms of training and preparation? Like, give us an insight.
I had
into
a 7-day routine. First and foremost is I stopped drinking for a whole year. No alcohol whatsoever. And of course that's a tough thing, right?
Yeah.
Because even the social thing. But that was just my choice. It doesn't mean you have to.
No, yeah.
Right?
But important.
And a lot of people that they still continue to drink beer and it doesn't matter. But that's just the approach I took. I said, this is again, it's betting against the house. I'm buying numbers against the house. I said, all right, I'm going to take one variable out of the equation, right? So anytime I can just cheat 1%, 2%, or take any variable that could be a limiting factor when it's all said and done out of the equation, I'm going to do that. And so one of that in my case was alcohol. I said, okay, I'm just not going to drink for a year. And so that was one thing I stopped doing. The second thing is I said, all right, I'm going to make this 7 days, no exceptions, no days off. Because again, my physical abilities, I wasn't going to allow that to be the limiting factor. Was I prepared enough physically? Was I in a good enough, aerobic and anaerobic shape or not? I wasn't going to go there and try to get into shape on the mountain, and I wasn't going to just assume that I would be in good enough shape when I got to the mountain. So what I did on Mondays, I ran, and I built this up over that course of a year.
Did you do this programming, or did you have somebody help you?
I did it myself.
Okay.
I did it myself, and I kind of just dialed it in based off my past experience by other climbers, mountaineers, that I know, and what was successful for them, and then I dialed it in based on my ecosystem of what's available to me and what I would want to do, right? And so what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to start building up running. I don't like running much, unless I have a ball in my hand or a ball in my foot.
Now we have two things alike.
Right. Not a big fan of it. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to build that up because I do need to have that base, right? That ability to go hour after hour after hour. So I built it up to running 10 to 15 miles every Monday. So I'd run 10 or 15 miles every Monday, and towards the tail end, I was running 15 miles every Monday. Then Tuesday, I would do heavy pack work. So I would load up my backpack with, say, somewhere between 60 and 75 pounds. I'd build that up. I think I started initially at 55, and I ended up at 75 by the time I left to go to Nepal. And I would do 1,000 to 1,500 heavy pack step-ups. So I'd walk around a park. I'd see a park bench. I knew a park that's near my house. There's like 27 benches, and I would do 27 sets at 40 each. I'd go up, over, down, down, so I can also build my knee strength, especially my lateral stability. Right. That's very important because you're not on even terrain.
You're not just going this way.
You're always like this.
Contour.
And your ankles and your knees are constantly adjusting.
We talk about that a lot.
Even if you don't know.
Those are intangible pieces
Absolutely.
of understanding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So to build up that knee strength and that lateral hip strength and all that kind of stuff with 75 pounds on my back. So I'd go up, over, down, hour after hour after hour, do 1,500 of those with 75 pounds on my back.
A whole bunch of people watching just said, okay, I'm out.
If you want to know what that looks like, I believe you have a time lapse of that. I remember watching that because there was like geese walking by, and you're just going up and down and up and down and up and down.
Yeah, it's comical. It's
Innocent bystanders going, what in the world is
exactly.
that guy?
I get a lot of that.
Oh, yeah.
Or if I'd go to a gym with a heavy backpack on and go to the stair stepper, and people are like, this guy's a freak, But yeah,
They're getting all mad because you're sweating on it. They're like, can you get off the machine, please?
So I started actually going later at night. So less people would look at me like a caged zoo animal.
Yeah.
The same thing goes in the park. I would go at midnight till 2 in the morning kind of stuff, where there's nobody there, right? And it's also peaceful at that time, too. Sure. And temperatures were a little bit more, conducive in the middle of summer than 90 degrees. So that was Tuesday. Then Wednesday, I would do either stair sprints or stuff. Anaerobic, building up those anaerobic capabilities.
Almost like interval stuff.
Exactly. To say, okay, I don't want to go any further, but I'm going to go further. I'm going to be able to burst. Now I need to burst. And then Thursday we do upper body. Again, there's still a decent component of that. Your neck, your shoulders. Yeah, exactly. Climbing. You're doing a lot of vertical stuff.
Well, there's a lot of data that talks about the importance of, using walking sticks and things like that, and how you can see as much as 10 to 15% economy improvement by utilizing that. It's like something where we incorporated that for ourselves recently, where I'm like, I never had walking sticks when we would have 30, 40, 50 pounds on our back, and all of a sudden we're like, we're idiots.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
Like,
well,
it
the
looks
thing-
so much easier when that guy's got a pole in his hand. Like,
Exactly. And the thing is, not just stability and not something to lean on by cheating with your upper body. That's also a huge benefit. But the thing you got to look at over time. 52 days.
Yep.
Right? If it's 5%, if it's 10%, that adds up.
Right.
Yeah.
Just like weight does on your body.
Compounding interest.
How much am I carrying? That adds up,
Right.
So that's what I did on Thursday was the upper body stuff. And then Friday, I would go back to running 15 miles. Saturday, I would do heavy pack work again. Sunday, I would do upper body again. Right? And then Monday, it'd start all over again. And for a whole year, without exceptions, I did that every single day.
How are you? And I think I admitted this to you the last time we talked about being a complete data junkie when it comes to stuff like that. Like Joel and I were joking the other day, the workout doesn't take place unless you got a heart rate monitor on and track it on your phone. How did you track this information? And were you tracking the information? And then, were you using some type of a platform so you could see, okay, I'm getting some improvement here, and maybe I'm overtraining, or maybe I'm overreaching, or whatever it may be?
I would use I used a thing that they would look back in the history book. The greatest mountaineer of all time was a guy named Reinhold Messner.
Reinhold Messner, yeah.
And people didn't know why he was able to do what he did, especially back then. There wasn't a lot of the physio science that there is today.
Wasn't he the first one to climb without stopbox?
Absolutely, and
Yeah,
he also
okay.
soloed it.
Yeah,
And so at that time, when he climbed Everest without oxygen, they said it's humanly impossible to do that.
Yeah.
And Messner did it. And then he went back the following year and did it by himself. He soloed it, right? So it's an unbelievable feat.
Yeah.
And then he went to go on and climb the other 13 of the 14 8,000-meter peaks without supplemental oxygen. Again, it's an amazing feat, especially during the time that he did it. But he wasn't this all-star soccer player. He wasn't this all-star athlete. He was your everyday kind of guy. It's like, well, how is Reinhold Messner doing this versus, let's say, the best track athlete on the planet at the time? And they look back at his training style. What I did is I said, okay, if I can cheat my body or train my body into burning fat versus carbohydrates, which is ultimately the goal, because we got hundreds of thousands of calories in fat reserves, everybody, no matter how thin or fat you are. If you can train yourself to burn that versus the measly 2,000 to 3,000 calories of carbohydrates that you might have sitting in your stomach from eating, you're not going to tank.
Right.
And so in that range is somewhere between, let's say, 55 to 65% of your maximum heart rate. And if you start training in that range, your body starts burning its fat, which now means you have more energy to sustain hour after hour. Because when you're talking about some of these days, it's 12 hours, 14-hour days nonstop. Right. And on my summit day, I was up for 42 hours straight before I finally laid down to try to go to sleep. So that's a long time. And then to be climbing for 27 hours or so during that time or longer, over 30 hours, again, to sustain that hour after hour like a metronome. So that's what I decided to do. And I think that's very helpful, because you then can say, all right, now my body can go dig deeper when you don't think there's anything left there, because your digestive system's already shutting down.
Right.
You're already whittling away. So why not maximize what your body can utilize in those situations?
And kind of teach the body to do it that way.
And so that's what I did.
Okay. So here's a question for you in regards to talking about VO2. We have there's a lot of, once again, information, misinformation, depending on where you look and who you listen to, so on and so forth, about the genetic gift of VO2, right? Okay, Secretariat was able to run as a horse faster than horses that were bigger than him because he had a bigger heart. Henceforth, he was pushing more blood, yada, yada, yada. There is a lot of people out there that say your VO2 is your number. You can't change that. That is what you are born with. It is genetics. It cannot be modified. Tell me I'm wrong.
At altitude, that's...
You're wrong.
You're absolutely wrong. Because altitude is a
I just had this conversation with Rob Hartman the other day. You're wrong.
Altitude is a great equalizer.
Right.
You can't take your VO2 max with you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And again, it comes down to that situation, and you don't know until you go.
Yeah.
So here at sea level, at 5,000 feet, I know I'm in the top 5 percentile because I'm at 83%, 87%, whatever.
Right.
But at altitude, it's a great equalizer.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty of people out there that, and I don't subscribe to that theory that that's what you're born with and you can't modify that, but it's also the method in which we track it too. So are we actually looking at the VO2 number, or are we looking at watts per kilo, or are we looking at millimoles of lactate?
Yeah, exactly.
And those are all the big things that, there are constant discussions out there, especially when we're, working in varying altitudes, working at varying loads all the time. what's the great measurement for that?
Yep.
How do we, how do we know what that number is? And what is the next step of that, of course, which is in your mind, the most accurate indicator of that, ability to have that work capacity.
Did you ever actually have a Vo2 like test in any of your preparation?
No. Did not.
Okay.
I was a guinea pig back before I went to Aconcagua to climb it with the Altitude Research Center here at Fitzsimmons Hospital at the University of Colorado. And I did trials there, because again, I was curious myself when I read about it. I said, "Yeah, I'll sign up for these. Let them beat me up. Let them, test me because I've never been to 22,000 feet, which is what Aconcagua is."
Right.
So I'm like, well, how do I know if I can hack that altitude?
Yeah.
So I went there, and again, it could only get me up around 17. Wasn't going to tell me if I could get there, but I could tell me at least a little bit again if I was going to be able to perform, cognitively be aware, these kind of things. What does the CAT scan show my brain look like, under hypoxic conditions and these kind of things. And that's why I did that. But that's the only indicator of that I did.
Right.
Because after that, I just kept going to higher mountains or climbing up and letting the altitude tell me exactly what the answer was.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But even then, Everest, when you look at Denali, 20,320, Everest is almost 9,000 feet higher.
Right.
Yeah.
So again, you don't know because once you get to Camp 3, you're higher than any mountain outside the Himalayas.
Right.
No mountains in the Andes, no mountains in Europe, nowhere else in the world outside the Himalayas is as high as Camp 3. So that is a new altitude record. Well, how are you doing at 23,500 feet? Right. You don't know until you go.
It's funny listening to this because it's like, in the world that we live in, everything is, like JC was saying, is all tracked by data. You have a heart rate monitor or you have this thing measuring that thing, whatever it is. And you just said, screw all that. Like, I'm just going to do it the way the old guys did.
That's exactly right.
And it just seems super counterintuitive to what a modern person who might be considering doing this, or any mountain for that measure, would be considering. They would be wanting to get as much information as possible about themselves and tracking their workouts and this, that, and the other. And you just went the complete opposite route of that. Like, I mean, just from our training perspective and some of the stuff that we do here. Like I was talking about the other day, we were using a pitch tracking technology for our pitchers, and they're like, "Do you wish you had this?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, I wish I had this." Right? Would it have made my career better? I don't know. Maybe not. Right? But maybe it would have. But it's almost like, you can overcomplicate
Right.
it.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of just saying, and that's the argument we have in the baseball world is it's old school, new school, right? Grab the ball and throw it hard, right? Like, some of the old school guys, I'd ask them, like, how hard did you throw back then? Juan Marichal, this guy asked, and he's like, I don't know, we didn't have radar guns. I just tried to blow it by him every single time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But nowadays we have quantifiable ways to measure things. And so that's what we try and live up to.
Yep, and that also can be a false sense of security. And a perfect example was on Everest with that person I told you, that 28% oxygen saturation level. That was an Olympic 2-time gold medalist. Had to get a heliovac from the highest point you can on the mountain. Otherwise, they would have gone to a coma and died. They trained in hyperbaric chambers. They did all that stuff because, again, they were Olympic athletes.
Right.
Sure.
So they had all of that. And that can be a false sense of security,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because they trained to 21,000 feet in their hyperbaric, hypoxic chambers.
I think it's just a really cool dichotomy to think about that you can still do these amazing feats the way that they used to be done.
Right.
Right. Like
Well,
way back in
and
the
also
day.
too, it is sort of a illumination of the issues that we have in the sports science world today.
Right.
It's at what point do we overcomplicate everything, right?
The,
I mean,
the KISS method, right? Just keep it simple, stupid.
Exactly.
And let's go climb a mountain.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of let's quantify and measure and test and this, that, and the other. Like, no, just get on the mountain and go.
But then the other piece that's associated with that is, okay, you accomplished this task and you did it, using very sort of traditional training methods. Now the scientist in me would love to dig in and figure out, okay, what is your VO2? Where, how many millimoles of lactate are you pushing at your functional threshold?
Are you
for power?
a freakish athlete or are you just an average athlete?
We just dissect you and figure out what's going on in there.
Right.
Well, I think there's a lot of really interesting things, especially when you talk about this type of endeavor, right? Which is you get a lot of people that, maybe after their high school or college or whatever, want to accomplish tasks. You know, we talk about this all the time. People are like, oh, like so and so ran a marathon, and I go, well, fat people finish marathons every day. So that's you know, there's an ability, and what a lot of people, what we find out a lot is that there are a ton of circumstances where, as you've mentioned, your inherent genetic or physiological makeup or whatever, you either find a way to tap into it, you find something that maybe you're good at, or you essentially train your way into some of these endeavors that, yes, there's a component of, we'll say, athleticism, but there's more a component of being able to learn how to do these things, being able to start training your way into doing them. There's no part of this where a ball flies at you at 100 miles an hour that you have to hit, right? So, you don't have to have hand-eye coordination to accomplish this, right? Like, you start to kind of vet out some of these things and realize that as you started embarking upon this, you're like, okay, I can do this, and I'm going to work my way up to this, and I can do this, and I'm going to work my way up to this. Within, as you talked about from a training perspective, I was waiting for you in your 7-day deal to say, oh, well, day 7 I did recovery and stretch and these types of things, right? Like, talk about that, which is within that, because in our mind as performance coaches, I'm going, well, where's your soft tissue work? And when did you do this? And like, did you incorporate things,
Every day.
stretching,
Every day,
ice baths, stuff like that? Did you have any setbacks within your training?
Yeah, of course, because the thing is, in my mind, I always try to push harder. Because again, I always had that what if scenario in the back of my head.
Yeah.
What if I'm not training hard enough? What if I'm not, being able to cover enough distance in time? What if I can't do 1,500 step ups versus, let's say, 700 of them? What if? Because you never know again until you go. So it's like, I always pushed myself harder and harder and kept building and building and building. So I would stretch, and I made sure to stay hydrated, and I would take, some supplements, to help with that process and so on. But I was always kind of paranoid of saying, taking a day off, taking 3 days off. Because I'm like, nope, I got to go. It's like almost a militaristic style approach where I'm like, I'm not going to let my guard down at all. Because once I get on that plane, that's the last time I can train. Once I'm heading to Nepal, there's no more training. Yeah. And now the degeneration starts.
Right.
And so I'm like, I want to be at the peak performance that I thought I could be at. And to another point that you mentioned with regards to, doing it later on versus, let's say, 22 years old when you have a better reaction time than, let's say, a 33-year-old batter. Actually, in mountaineering, it's a big benefit to be a little bit older. Because of the rigidity of your lungs, and so on. So you're less likely to get, HACE or HAPE, which is high altitude cerebral edema or pulmonary edema. Younger athletes are more likely to get HAPE and HACE, let's say in their 20s than, let's say, a guy in the mid-30s. That's why you also see a lot of triathletes that are a little bit older.
Yeah.
It's actually the endurance side of things get a little bit better as you get older, and then there's that sweet spot, in your early 30s to up to 40 or so, and then you start to get to the degeneration side where then now you're starting to lose the physical performance.
Right.
But that's really a good place to be in high altitude to go on to Everest, and also the mentality.
Yeah.
You've seen enough, you've heard enough.
Yeah.
You've been hurt enough that you've learned enough.
Yeah.
Which the 20-year-old kid is not going to have that.
Yeah, you could be stupid and overconfident and have too much bravado, but when you're older, you're a little wiser.
Yep. You know your body better as well.
Very interesting.
So,
yeah.
I just did the quick math. I figured you did about 3,000 step-ups a day for 52 weeks. Is 156,000 step-ups with a
okay.
55 to 75-pound pack on your back.
That's
Who's signing up?
Yeah. So then the question becomes, did you take 156,000 steps on the mountain?
From the start of Lukla to the summit, I wish I would have calculated. I was going to do that, but I was so involved in filming too that I couldn't just focus on that. If I was just going to climb and do the physio geek stuff, I would have totally done that.
Oh, of course.
But yeah, I think I did more than that for sure.
You didn't have a pedometer in your pocket?
Yeah, the thing is, exactly. But then it's based off the battery of my cell phone, for example, right?
Well, and I think that there's also other parts of that too, right? Which is you can only do so much. If you wanted to collect or find that kind of data, it'd been like your mission is you're trying to capture and film and everything. Someone else's mission is let's collect data.
Yeah, right.
Like if you take on too much, and again, you mentioned it in the first one, you're like, there's no moment at all from the minute you step on the mountain where you can let your guard down.
Right.
And if you create too many distractions, if you create too many things for you to worry about, then again, that becomes a hazard, right?
Yep.
So, very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm like, this is. Can we get another hour?
Whatever you guys want to do.
We got a little bit of time still. So,
when Joel mentioned it a little bit, setbacks in your training. I mean, was it injury? Was it cumulative fatigue? Was it
Cumulative fatigue more?
Yeah,
Would be
okay,
it. So
okay.
let's say when I'm running 15 miles, and all of a sudden one day I'm running at the 13th mile, it's like, oh, there's my hammy.
Yeah.
I feel it. I'm starting
tendonitis, any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Or then when I got back, right before I got the stretching, there's that lactic acid build in my calves.
Yep.
That kind of
Yeah.
stuff. Because the day before I did the 1,500 step-ups, right?
Right.
And now I'm running 15 miles, and so I'm really, really pumping it. And there was some of that. But so what I did is I just morphed the muscle group that I could then focus on. So okay, fine, my calves hurt really bad to the point where it's counterproductive to do 1,500 step-ups a day or to do wind sprints, or to run stairs, right? So instead, let's just do quad-based leg sleds, that kind of stuff. All right, fine, I can cheat it here.
So you
I
did a little adapting.
I did. I
So you
improvised.
didn't do 156,000 steps.
There wasn't a day that I missed my path.
We'll stay with that number.
That's
yeah.
awesome.
So-
Now, within taking that, you did a year's worth of
Yeah.
that, right? And in that year, what other things did you do? Did you have any training based stuff on the mountain? Like how did you mix in some of those things too? Because I look at it and say, oh crap, well, you ran 15 miles two times a week. There's 120 miles a month, right? You did 1,500 step ups 2 times a week, right? And those types of things. Outside of that, because to me, I'm looking at it going, well, that seems like enough. But I'm sure there were also, in conjunction with that,
Yep.
what else did you do on the hill, on the mountain? Did you do practice in terms
Yep.
of emergency situations and those types of things?
So then what you do is you take the pack and you say, okay, let's go get some elevation under my belt, right? And so you go to like Mount Morrison, which is accessible close to Denver, but you get a good vertical and a short distance. This instead of doing, stairs right now, or after I want stairs, let's go to Morrison first or vice versa, and actually get to some of the altitude, under my belt, not just at 5280 the whole time. So on the weekends, when I would go up on my heavy pack days, I would sometimes go in the mountains and do that kind of stuff, to actually get up onto the practical side of what a mountain is versus what a gym is versus what a park bench is or whatever, or a set of stairs. I would mix that in as well.
Yeah.
I think Joel, for when we get an animal down in the woods
Yes.
to help us pack it out.
Speed dial. Right
And I
here.
think, you just keep your
Hey,
phone
Alex.
keep it plugged in and powered on in
Yeah.
the month of September.
Yeah, we got to get that.
Okay.
You might get a phone call.
Hey,
We got to get that in reach.
Yeah, right. Hey,
So-
I need you to drive out here. We got a 1,500 foot hike to get out. 80-pound pack of meat.
Yeah. Well, I talked to or saw some stuff from Mark over the weekend, and they just did the Frank Church thing, and they did 30,000 feet up and down in 3 days. Yeah.
Wow.
It's called the death hike for a reason.
Yeah.
I bet it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. So I'm excited to hear
Yeah.
to hear about that one. But that's a lot of elevation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and the thing is, if you continue to go higher, that's the bigger issue, right? If you get to a ceiling point, you keep doing this,
Yeah.
it's very difficult, but physiologically, you're capable of doing that.
Right.
If you're trying to do 30,000 feet of elevation as you're progressing up a mountain, and going just back down a couple times in a couple of days, that's
So one thing we haven't talked about yet. So in the first episode, we were talking about your experience up there, and your brother actually reminded me that you actually got sick on the mountain.
did.
So how did that affect how long were you sick for? And then two, how did that affect your body in terms of fighting that sickness and then recovering from it to continue your climb?
Yeah, it was brutal. It happened during our second rotation when we tried to get to camp 3 at 23,500, 23,600 feet, which again, above that, you can't acclimatize anymore, can't produce any more red blood cells, so there's no reason to go any higher. again, it's the limiting factor thing that you talked about. Can't go any higher until you go for the summit. There's no point to it. It's just defeatist. And it was during that rotation. I got super bad flu/pneumonia during that process. And I get to the base of the Vo2 face, which is this 5,000-foot objective that blocks you between Camp 2 and Camp 4. And you have to climb this 5,000-foot wall of ice. And Camp 3 is halfway up that, And so you get there, and you're looking up at this beast, and I'm talking to Ryan and Tashi. Ryan was our expedition leader, a good friend of mine, and Tashi, another good friend of mine, who was our Sirdar, the head Sherpa. And they stood there, and they wanted to stop me from trying to go up that face to tag Camp 3 because I was so sick. They said, just go back to the tents, go lay down in your sleeping bag, come back up a week later to try to tag that elevation when some of our Sherpa guys are going up there to move some supplies or something. I said, no, I'm not going to burden anybody. I'm standing here. I'm going to try it. And that was absolutely brutal. But I made my way to Camp 3, and sat down, had some water, and went back down shortly thereafter. And then we went all the way back down to base camp to wait now for our summit push. But I was sick for about 13 days.
Oh.
So, and they were talking about flying me all the way back to Kathmandu on a helicopter to get to low altitude because, again, your immune system is absolutely compromised. Yeah. So you're not going to get better. But I'm like, no, I'm here. I'm not going to burden anybody. I'm going to gut it out, and we'll see what happens. Right. And luckily, I guess, was to my favor was that our original summit day was supposed to be the 18th of May. We pushed it back to the 21st because some of our team members got sick, and we had to helivac somebody to Kathmandu. One of our Sherpas got sick, and so on. That the way it worked out, we got 3 extra days before we went to the summit, because the weather's conditions were changing as well. And I think that 3 days helped when it was time to go. And but yeah, I was sick for a long time. And did I fully recover? Probably not. A lot of it was mind over matter at that point because I had a goal in hand that I had to achieve because, again, I had cameras to document this stuff as well, not just to personally achieve a goal. And but it was absolutely the sickest I've ever been in my life.
So did you have medication that you were taking, like just Advil or something? I mean, because like I said, your body's not really fighting anything. So are you just
popping Theraflus? Okay, that's it. Right. Staying hydrated. Popping Theraflus, popping vitamins. My daily regimen on a mountain is that I established back on Rainier. I've been using that ever since, and it's just my regimen. And part of that, I just would inundate. Okay, let's do some Dayquil, some NyQuil stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you're talking about feeling like hell, that's what feeling like hell is like. Because at altitude, it's just
magnified.
It's magnified.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
But knock on wood, I came back with 10 fingers and 10 toes, and I made it. So.
And nose.
Yeah, right. So very cool. Well, I think as with round one, we probably could continue for hours more. Definitely, it gives a lot of insight as to the things you did beforehand, right? Like we kind of prefaced it by talking about the trek itself, and now we're kind of like reverse engineering this into, all right, now what did you do? And then I think, in episode 3, we kind of want to like pull this whole thing together, right? Which is talk more about, the Quest Everest piece and the utilization and the sharing of it and some retrospect. I think that's going to be the goal with that, which is, how is this now, you can now look back on this and go, okay, that was, obviously a life kind of altering event to be able to say you did, and how is it now moving forward for you, which I think is going to be really cool.
Well, and I think it's applicable to what you guys do and your guys' clients that you have, is because it's about conquering your own Everest. Doesn't matter if I want to get another 2, whether or not I can lug 80 pounds versus 60 pounds of meat down from a hunt. You're talking about running, up at, Leadville or high altitudes, getting ready for the Olympics or whatever the case may be. It's not about climbing Everest. It's about conquering your own Everest. And whatever that Everest is that you set in your life, these factors that you can take from this in order to conquer your own Everest. And those are the things that I think that are very applicable as well, because you have to go 20% harder than you've ever gone in order to make it to the top. But that also can kill you. Yep. Right. Same thing goes if I want to make the Olympics. Well, then I can also get to a point where I now hurt myself so bad that I missed my window for the Olympics. Yep. Same kind of a thing.
Yeah, most definitely.
That was like super profound right there.
Yeah,
I want to go exercise or something.
We
I
should.
want to go conquer my own Everest.
There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Because
So
I certainly need to.
yeah, without question. So, well, very cool. Thank you so much again. We're, like I said, I think the questions could continue flying, and we're going to ask and put together a few more for you. If you'll have another hour of your time, and we can steal a little bit more of it.
Well,
but
he already has to because we've already teased this as a 3-part
this
series.
is true.
We've only
Yeah.
shot 2 of these.
Yeah. So, and we aren't doing these in succession like we spent a whole day in here. Like, we aren't actually forcing him or asking him to come back. So,
It's a good thing you don't live far from here.
Yeah. So thankfully, because we'd be broke already if we had to fly you in for all this. So our budget's pretty low.
Well, I greatly appreciate your time, guys. It's my pleasure hanging out with you for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we'll look forward to episode number 3. We hope you guys enjoyed today, and on to the next.
Off we go.
Off we go.
Thanks for watching and listening.